The retirement party was Marcus's idea. I know this because Bernard told me. And Bernard knew because he had spent 25 years as my corporate attorney and had developed, over those 25 years, the particular network of professional relationships that allows a careful man to know things before he is officially told them. Marcus had been planning it for 6 weeks. The venue was the Biltmore in Atlanta, the private dining room on the 3rd floor, the one they used for significant events, with the round tables and the white linens and the particular lighting that made everything look more ceremonial than it actually was. He had invited the entire board of Collins Medical Supplies, the senior management team, several of our largest clients. The mayor's office had sent someone. 47 people in total gathered on a Thursday evening in April to celebrate 35 years of a company I had built from a folding table in my living room and to wish its founder a well-deserved retirement. The speeches were prepared. The gifts were wrapped. The transition documents were ready for signing. 4 pages that would transfer operational authority to Marcus and Diane, effective immediately, with Dorothy May Collins moving to an honorary chairperson role that carried a title and no power. Everything was planned. It was a beautiful plan. The only problem was that I had spent the previous 18 months planning something considerably more significant. I sat at the table of honor at my retirement party in the Biltmore in Atlanta, and I listened to Marcus give his speech about legacy and leadership, and the extraordinary woman who had built Collins Medical Supplies into what it was today. I listened to Diane talk about sacrifice and vision, and how proud she was to be Dorothy Collins' daughter. I watched Craig smile at the board members with the confidence of a man who believes the difficult part is already done. And when the speeches were finished, and the applause had settled, and Marcus placed the transition documents in front of me with a pen, and the particular warmth of someone who has confused managing a situation with resolving it, I reached into my jacket, and I placed a different document on the table, and I said, "Before I sign anything, there's something the board needs to see. Before I tell you what was in that document, I need to ask you something. If the people you had spent 35 years building something for, your own children, the ones you had brought into the company, trained, promoted, trusted with the work of your life, if those people had spent 18 months planning your removal, right down to the venue and the speeches and the transition paperwork, what would you do? Would you confront them before the party? Walk out? Sign the documents and accept the retirement they had planned for you? Or would you sit at the table of honor, listen to every speech, accept every gift, smile at every board member, and then reach into your jacket and place a document on the table that changed everything they thought they had planned? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is already sitting in your chest, if you have ever built something and watched the people you built it for begin to position themselves around it as if the building were not the point, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly, and every one of them runs deeper than you expect. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Let me take you back to the beginning. Because what I placed on that table didn't start 18 months ago. It started 35 years ago, with a folding table in my living room, and a phone, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had decided that a thing was going to happen, and had organized her entire life around making it happen. My name is Dorothy May Collins. I was born in 1957 in Atlanta, Georgia, the third of 5 children in a family that understood, with the practical clarity of people who have learned it through direct experience rather than theory, that the difference between having something and not having it was usually the difference between showing up and not showing up. My father worked at a hospital, not as a doctor, not as an administrator, as a maintenance worker, in the particular invisibility of someone whose work is essential and whose presence is rarely acknowledged. He maintained the equipment. He kept the machines running. He understood, through 30 years of watching the hospital function, the particular relationship between the equipment that made medicine possible and the outcomes that equipment produced. He talked about it at dinner, about the ventilator that had saved a patient's life because it had been serviced correctly, about the imaging machine that had produced an accurate diagnosis because it had been calibrated properly, about the relationship between the maintenance of medical equipment and the quality of the medicine practiced with it. I listened. I was a child who listened. I went to Georgia State on a partial scholarship and studied business. Not because I had a specific plan, but because business was the vocabulary I needed to build whatever I was going to build, And I had understood from watching my father that I was going to build something. The specifics were not yet clear. The direction was. I graduated in 1979. I went to work at a medical supplies distribution company. An entry-level position, sales support, the kind of job that exists at the bottom of an industry, and that teaches you, if you are paying attention, everything about how the industry works from the inside. I was paying attention. I paid attention for 6 years. I learned the vendors, the pricing structures, the relationships between hospitals and suppliers, and the particular leverage points where someone who understood the full picture could do things more efficiently than the people who only understood their part of it. In 1985, I left. I set up a folding table in my living room. I had a phone and a list of contacts I had developed over 6 years, and the particular credibility that comes from being the person at a company who knows how to solve problems that other people cannot solve. I called the contacts. I offered to solve their problems more efficiently than their current suppliers. 6 of them said yes. That was enough to begin. Collins Medical Supplies was incorporated in 1985, with Dorothy May Collins as its sole owner and only employee. By 1990, it had 12 employees and annual revenues that allowed me to move from the folding table in my living room to an actual office. By 1995, it had 40 employees and contracts with hospital systems across 3 states. By 2005, it was a regional company with revenues in the tens of millions and a reputation built on 30 years of doing what it said it would do on the schedule. It said it would do it. By the time Marcus and Diane joined the company, Marcus in 2005, Diane in 2008, Collins Medical Supplies was a significant organization, not a Fortune 500 company, not a household name, but significant. The kind of company that existed in the middle distance of an industry, essential to the people who used it, and largely invisible to everyone else. I had built it entirely by myself. I want to be clear about that. Not because I want credit. Credit is not the point. But because understanding who built it is essential to understanding what happened next. Marcus joined in 2005 as a vice president of operations. He was 30 years old, intelligent, with his father's energy and my organizational instincts, in a combination that I had hoped would produce something extraordinary. For several years it did. He was good at operations. He understood systems. He could take a process that was working at 70% efficiency and push it to 90% through the particular focused attention of someone who finds that kind of problem genuinely engaging. Diane joined in 2008 as Director of Client Relations. She was 27, with a warmth that clients responded to immediately, and an instinct for the particular human dimensions of a business relationship. The things that make clients stay not just because the service is adequate, but because they feel known by the people providing it. They were both, for the first years, genuinely good. And then, something shifted. Not immediately. Not dramatically. In the particular gradual way that things shift when people begin to confuse their contribution to something with ownership of it. They had contributed, significantly. In the years they had been at Collins Medical Supplies, the company had continued to grow, and their contributions to that growth were real and documentable. But they had not built it. They had joined something that was already built, and had helped it grow. The distinction matters. It matters, because the person who builds something has a relationship to it that is different from the relationship of the person who joins it. The builder knows what it cost, knows what was risked, knows the specific nights when it almost didn't make it, and the specific decisions that saved it, and the specific people who helped at the moments when help was necessary. Marcus and Diane did not know these things. They knew the company as it had existed when they arrived, already built, already operational, already possessed of the reputation that 30 years of showing up had produced. And they had begun, slowly, and without apparent awareness that they were doing it, to treat that existing thing as if it were simply the context for their own contributions, rather than the accumulated result of their mother's 30 years. Craig arrived in 2012 when he married Diane. He was an accountant by training, a CFO by profession, and a strategic thinker by disposition. The kind of man who looks at an organization and sees not what it is, but what it could be arranged to become. He looked at Collins Medical Supplies and he saw an opportunity. Not an opportunity for the company, an opportunity for Marcus and Diane. He saw a 60-year-old founder whose children were in senior positions and who had, by any reasonable assessment, built the company to the point where its continued growth was going to require either a significant capital infusion or a strategic sale or a genuine transition of leadership. He began talking to Marcus about leadership transition, not aggressively, carefully, the way strategic thinkers talk about things they want to happen, framing them as inevitable, as natural, as simply the correct next step for an organization at this stage of its development. Marcus listened. Diane listened. And 18 months before the retirement party at the Biltmore, the three of them began to plan. I knew they were planning. Bernard told me. And when Bernard told me, I sat at my kitchen table in Atlanta and thought about 35 years of showing up, and about my father maintaining equipment in the hospital, and about the folding table in my living room, and about the particular stubbornness of a woman who has decided that a thing is going to happen. And I picked up the phone, and I called someone I had been meaning to call for a while. The someone I called was a man named Robert Ashford. Robert Ashford was the managing partner of Ashford Capital, a private equity firm based in Atlanta that had spent the previous decade acquiring mid-sized medical supply and distribution companies and building them into something more significant than their individual parts. I had known Robert Ashford for 12 years. Not as a target. He had approached me twice in that time about a potential acquisition of Collins Medical Supplies, and both times I had declined, not because the offer was insufficient, but because the timing was wrong. The company was still in a phase of growth that I believed required independence to complete, and I had said so, and Robert Ashford had accepted the reasoning with the patience of a man who understood that the right deal at the wrong time is not the right deal. He had waited. When I called him the week after Bernard told me about Marcus and Craig's conversations, he answered on the second ring. "Dorothy," he said. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I'm ready to talk," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "What changed?" he asked. "The timing," I said. He understood immediately. That was one of the things I valued about Robert Ashford. He understood immediately, without requiring things to be explained that didn't need explaining. "When can you meet?" he asked. "Tomorrow," I said. We met in his office the following morning. "I need to tell you about the shareholder agreement. Not because it is exciting. Shareholder agreements are, by their nature, documents rather than drama, but because it is the hinge of everything that followed, and understanding it is the only way to understand how 18 months of planning, by 3 intelligent people, produced an outcome they had not anticipated. When I incorporated Collins Medical Supplies in 1985, I had retained Bernard Walsh as my corporate attorney. Bernard had drafted the original shareholder agreement. The original shareholder agreement established Dorothy Mae Collins as the sole shareholder of Collins Medical Supplies, with 100% ownership and full authority over all major corporate decisions including, and this is the specific language that mattered 35 years later, any sale, merger, acquisition, or transfer of ownership of the company or its assets. Over the years, as Marcus and Diane joined the company and were given equity stakes as part of their compensation, the shareholder agreement had been amended. Marcus held 15%, Diane held 15%, Dorothy held 70%. And the shareholder agreement, the amended version, which Bernard had drafted with the particular care of a man who had been practicing corporate law for 30 years, and who understood that the documents you sign in the good years are the ones that matter in the complicated ones, retained a specific provision. The provision was this: any sale of the company required the approval of shareholders holding more than 50% of the equity. Dorothy held 70%. Dorothy's approval was sufficient. Marcus and Diane's approval was not required. They had signed this agreement. They had signed it because when they joined the company and received their equity stakes, they were junior employees receiving compensation, and the agreement was presented to them as standard documentation. And they had read it with the attention that people give to documents they don't expect to matter, and had signed it. They had not consulted their own attorneys. They had trusted their mother. That trust was, in retrospect, not misplaced. Their mother had not hidden the terms from them. The terms were there, clearly written, in a document they had signed. The trust that turned out to be misplaced was the trust they had in their own assessment of the situation. The assessment that said their mother was a 67-year-old woman who cleaned her own house and drove a 12-year-old car and had never expressed any interest in a sale, and that the company was therefore theirs to plan around. They had assessed incorrectly. The negotiation with Ashford Capital took 14 months. 14 months of meetings and due diligence and revised term sheets, and the particular back and forth of a significant acquisition negotiated between two careful parties who each understood what they had and what they wanted, and were willing to take the time required to arrive at terms that reflected both. The final number was $340 million for the full company. Dorothy's 70% stake, $238 million. Marcus's 15% stake, $51 million. Diane's 15% stake, $51 million. Bernard reviewed the agreement 17 times before I signed it. I signed it on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 weeks before the retirement party at the Biltmore. The acquisition would close 60 days after the signing, which was 60 days after a Tuesday in March, which was, as I had calculated when I scheduled the signing, approximately 2 weeks after the retirement party. The sequence was deliberate. I wanted to attend the retirement party. I wanted to hear the speeches. I wanted to see what Marcus and Craig had planned, and how they had planned it, and what they believed they were accomplishing. And then I wanted to place a document on the table, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as the final, necessary, honest communication of a woman who had spent 35 years building something, and who believed that the people she had built it for deserved to understand, clearly and completely, what that building had actually produced. The Biltmore was exactly what Marcus had intended it to be. Beautiful. Ceremonial. The private dining room on the 3rd floor with the round tables and the white linens and 47 people who had been told they were celebrating the retirement of Dorothy May Collins, and who had come because Dorothy May Collins was the kind of woman whose retirement was worth celebrating. I arrived at 6:30. Marcus was at the door. He had the expression he always had at events he had organized, the controlled satisfaction of someone whose plan is proceeding on schedule. He embraced me with the warmth of a son who loves his mother, and has also spent 18 months planning her removal from the company she built, and I embraced him back with the warmth of a mother who loves her son, and has also spent 14 months negotiating the sale of that company for $340 million. We were both, in our way, entirely sincere. Diane was inside with Craig. Diane's warmth was different from Marcus's, more genuine in some ways, more conflicted. She had the expression of a woman who has been persuaded by her husband that something is the right thing to do, and who is still, at some level, not entirely sure it is. I kissed her cheek. I shook Craig's hand. I found my seat at the table of honor. The dinner was excellent. I ate everything. The speeches began at 8. Marcus spoke first. He talked about legacy, the word that people use when they want to communicate that something is ending while framing it as a continuation. He talked about Dorothy Collins's extraordinary vision and her 35 years of leadership and the company she had built and what it meant to be her son and to have had the privilege of working beside her. He talked about the future, about the next chapter, about the extraordinary team. He looked at Diane. He looked at Craig, that was positioned to take Collins Medical Supplies into the decades ahead. He talked about transition. That word, transition, was doing a great deal of work in his speech. Diane spoke second. She cried a little, which was genuine. Whatever the plan was and whatever role she had played in it, Diane's love for me was real, and her emotion at the ceremony of this moment was real, and I held both of those things, the love and the plan, without requiring them to cancel each other out. The board chair spoke. 2 senior clients spoke. The person from the mayor's office said something appropriately ceremonial. And then Marcus stood again and said, "On behalf of the Collins Medical Supplies family, we'd like to present Dorothy with the transition documents that will formalize her move to the role of honorary chairperson, with our profound gratitude for everything she has given this company and this industry." He placed the documents in front of me. 4 pages, the transfer of operational authority, the new role description, the compensation package for the honorary position, the signature line. He placed the pen beside the documents. He smiled. 47 people looked at me. I looked at the documents. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Diane. I looked at Craig, who had the particular expression of a man who has reached the moment his plan was designed to reach, and who is experiencing the satisfaction of the plan arriving where it was supposed to arrive. Then I reached into my jacket. I took out the document. I placed it on the table beside the transition documents. Marcus looked at it. The board chair looked at it. I said, "Before I sign anything, there's something the board needs to see." The room was very quiet. Marcus picked up the document. He read the first page. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Marcus was not a dramatic man, but completely. The controlled satisfaction left his face, and what replaced it was something that I had not seen on my son's face since he was 12 years old, and had been caught in something he had not expected to be caught in. "What is this?" he said. "It's a purchase agreement," I said, "between Collins Medical Supplies and Ashford Capital. Signed March the 14th. March the 14th, the board chair said. He was a man named Howard Ellis, 68 years old, who had been on the Collins Medical Supplies board for 15 years, and who was, I knew, genuinely fond of me, and genuinely uncertain about what he was reading. 6 weeks ago, I confirmed. Diane was very still. Craig had gone a color I had not seen on him before. "Dorothy," Howard Ellis said. "This says $340 million, I said. "For the full company. The acquisition closes in 2 weeks. The room was silent in the way that rooms are silent when everyone in them is processing something simultaneously, and the processing has not yet produced words. Marcus set the document down. He looked at me. "Mom," he said. His voice was different from any version of it I had heard in 44 years of being his mother. "You," he stopped. "You sold the company." "I did," I said. "Without..." He stopped again. "Without telling us." I looked at him steadily. "I own 70% of Collins Medical Supplies," I said. "The shareholder agreement you signed in 2005 gives me full authority to approve a sale without requiring the consent of minority shareholders." Bernard reviewed it. Ashford Capital's legal team reviewed it. "The agreement is clean." Craig said, "That can't be." "It is," I said. "Bernard is available if you'd like to speak with him tonight." Craig looked at his phone. He was already calling someone. Diane looked at me. Her expression was not Craig's expression. It was not Marcus's expression. It was something more personal than both of those. The expression of a daughter who is understanding something about her mother, that reorganizes not just the current situation, but the entire history of the relationship. "Mom," she said. "Diane," I said. "You knew," she said. "About..." She stopped. "About what we were planning." "I knew," I said. The room was very quiet. "How long?" she asked. "Bernard told me 18 months ago," I said. The same week, Craig had his first conversation with Marcus about leadership transition. Diane closed her eyes. Marcus was looking at the acquisition document. He was reading it carefully now. The careful reading of a man who has understood that the document is real and is trying to find in it something that changes the situation and is not finding it. Howard Ellis leaned forward. "Dorothy," he said, "I want to make sure I understand. You signed this agreement 6 weeks ago." "Yes," I said. "And the acquisition closes in 2 weeks." "In 2 weeks," I said. "And you came tonight." He looked at the transition documents, at the speeches, at 47 people gathered for a retirement party. He looked at me, knowing all of this. "I came tonight," I said, "because my children organized a party for me, and I am their mother, and I was not going to miss it." Howard Ellis looked at me for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he began to smile. Marcus looked up from the document. He looked at Howard Ellis smiling. He looked at me, and something happened in my son's face that I had been waiting for without knowing I had been waiting for it. Not the controlled satisfaction of a plan proceeding correctly, not the managed warmth of a son performing consideration for his mother. Something real. The particular expression of a person who has just understood that the woman sitting across from him is not the woman he had assessed her to be, and that the assessment had been wrong for a very long time. "Mom," he said, His voice was different again. Not the corporate voice, not the event voice. The real one. The one I recognized from when he was small, and something had happened that exceeded his capacity to manage it. Yes, I said. He looked at the document. Then he looked at me. Then he did something I had not anticipated. He laughed. Not with humor exactly, though there was some of that. With the particular release of a man who has been outmaneuvered by his own mother so completely that the only honest response to the completeness of it is a kind of astonished recognition. He laughed and shook his head, and I looked at my son, at the 44-year-old man who had spent 18 months planning my retirement, and who was sitting in the Biltmore in Atlanta, having just discovered that I had spent 14 of those months negotiating a $340 million sale, and I felt something that was not triumph, something more complicated than triumph, something that was love, partly, and grief, partly, and the particular satisfaction of a woman who has spent 35 years building something and who has just communicated, as clearly as it can be communicated, what that building was actually worth. Craig left early. He had made several phone calls during the dinner and had spent a portion of the evening in the hallway, and had returned with the expression of a man whose attorney has confirmed what he did not want confirmed, and who is now managing his response to that confirmation. He shook my hand when he left. His handshake was careful, professional. The handshake of a man who has understood that the person whose hand he is shaking is someone he had significantly underestimated, and who is attempting to communicate, through the handshake, that the underestimation has been corrected. It's a fair deal, he said quietly, for everyone. Yes, I said. It is. He nodded, and left. Marcus and Diane stayed. After the other guests had gone, Howard Ellis last, after a conversation with me that I will describe in a moment, the three of us sat at the table of honor in the Biltmore's private dining room with the white linens and the particular quiet of a room that has held a significant event and is now holding its aftermath. Diane said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about the honest answer. "Because," I said, "you were planning something without telling me, and I wanted to understand what you were planning before I responded to it." She looked at the table. Marcus said, "We weren't trying to hurt you." "I know," I said. "We thought..." He stopped. "We thought you were ready to step back, that you'd built it and it was time, and that we could..." He stopped again. "Take it from here," I said. He nodded. I looked at my son. "Marcus," I said, "the company was never going to be yours through a transition document signed at a retirement party. If you had wanted to run Collins Medical Supplies, the conversation was always available. I have been here for 35 years. I have never been unavailable for a real conversation." He held my gaze. "You never asked," I said. "You planned." He was quiet. "There's a difference," I said. "I know," he said. And he did. I could see that he did. Not just the fact of it, but the weight of it. The particular weight of a son understanding that the approach he had chosen had communicated something about how he saw his mother that was not accurate, and that he had not intended to communicate, but had communicated nonetheless. Diane reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "What happens now?" she asked. "The acquisition closes in 2 weeks," I said. "Your stakes, 15% each, are worth $51 million apiece. The money will be in your accounts within 30 days of closing." Neither of them spoke. "You built careers here," I said. "Good ones. Ashford Capital has agreed to retain you both in senior roles if you want to stay. Robert Ashford will reach out next week." Diane looked at me. "You negotiated that?" she said. "Our positions? It was important to me," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mom, why?" I thought about the folding table in my living room in 1985, about the 6 clients who said yes, about 35 years of showing up. "Because," I said, "whatever else happened, you are my children, and I built this for you. Not for you to take from me, but for you to have something real when the time came." The room was very quiet, and in that quiet, in the particular silence of 3 people who love each other and have just had the most honest conversation they have ever had. Something settled. Not everything. Not the full weight of 18 months of planning and 14 months of negotiation and the retirement party that was also a buyout. Not immediately. But something. The beginning of something more honest than what had existed before it. And beginnings, I had learned over 67 years, were usually enough. The acquisition closed on a Thursday morning in May. Bernard called me at 10:15 to confirm. "Dorothy," he said. "It's done." "Thank you, Bernard," I said. He was quiet for a moment. 35 years, he said. 35 years, I agreed. Another pause. Then, "What are you going to do now?" I thought about that. "I'm going to have breakfast," I said. "And then I'm going to think about what comes next." He laughed. The money appeared in the accounts within the timeline, specified in the agreement. Marcus called me the afternoon of the closing. He was, by then, 2 weeks into conversations with Robert Ashford about his continued role at Collins Medical Supplies under the new ownership. And those conversations had gone well in the way that conversations go well when both parties bring something real to them. Marcus brought operational expertise and institutional knowledge, and the particular credibility that came from having helped build the company. Ashford Capital brought capital and strategic resources and the infrastructure of a larger organization. They were going to be fine. I knew this before Marcus called to tell me. He called to tell me something else. "Mom," he said, "I want you to know something." "Tell me," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, "about the difference between planning and asking." "Yes," I said. "I should have asked," he said, "a long time ago. What you wanted. For the company. For yourself. I assumed I knew and I didn't ask." "No," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask now?" he said. "Of course," I said. "What do you want?" he asked. "Now that it's done, what do you actually want?" I thought about it honestly. "I want," I said, "to sleep past 6 for the first time in 35 years. I want to travel to the places I told myself I'd go when the company was stable enough to leave. I want to have Sunday dinners with my children that are about Sunday dinner and not about the company." He was quiet. "We can do that," he said. "The Sunday dinners." "Yes," I said. "We can." Diane came to my house the following Sunday. Not with Marcus, not with Craig. Alone, which was unusual, and which communicated something about what she was coming to say that the coming alone communicated before she said anything. She brought sweet potato pie, from my recipe. I made coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table the way mothers and daughters sit when the formal occasions are over, and what remains is simply the relationship. She said, "I want to understand something." "What?" I asked. "Why the party?" She said, "You could have told us about the sale before the party. You could have called. You could have..." She stopped. "You could have done it any other way." I thought about the honest answer. "Because," I said, "you organized a party to tell me, in front of 47 people, that my time was over. And I thought it was important that you understand, in front of those same 47 people, that I had determined when my time was over. Not you." Diane held my gaze. "That's fair," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at her coffee. "Craig is embarrassed," she said. "I know," I said. "He thought he had it figured out," she said. "He's a smart man," I said. "He had most of it figured out. He simply didn't have the shareholder agreement." She almost smiled. "Mom," she said. "Yes?" "You're terrifying," she said. I looked at my daughter. "I'm your mother," I said. "There's a difference." She did smile at that. A real one. Then she picked up her fork and cut into the sweet potato pie she had made from my recipe. And we had Sunday dinner. Robert Ashford called me 3 months after the closing. He was calling, he said, because he had a question that was outside the scope of the acquisition agreement, but that he wanted to ask anyway. "Ask it," I said. He asked whether I would be interested in joining the Ashford Capital Advisory Board, not as an executive, not in any operational role, but as an advisor. Someone who could bring to the firm's medical supply portfolio the 35 years of industry knowledge and relationship equity that could not be acquired through any transaction, regardless of the purchase price. I told him I needed to think about it. I thought about it for a week. Then I called Bernard. "Bernard," I said, "if I joined an advisory board, would that count as retirement?" He laughed. "Dorothy," he said, "I don't think retirement is really your category." "No," I said, "I don't think it is either." I called Robert Ashford. I told him yes. The first Sunday dinner after the acquisition closed was at my house. Marcus came with his wife. Diane came with Craig. 4 grandchildren between them, ranging from 7 to 14, who descended on my kitchen with the particular energy of children who understand that their grandmother's kitchen is a place where things are made and that the making is something they are allowed to participate in. I put them to work. Not seriously. Not with any real expectation of culinary contribution. But present beside me, doing the things that children do in kitchens when adults are cooking and the adults have decided that presence matters more than efficiency. Craig was the most different. Of all of them, Craig was the most changed in the month since the Biltmore. Not humbled exactly. Craig was not a man with a large capacity for humility, but recalibrated. The particular recalibration of someone who has encountered evidence that a significant assessment was wrong, and who is in the process of building a new assessment from more accurate information. He helped set the table. Without being asked. I noticed. At dinner, Marcus said, "I've been thinking about the shareholder agreement." I looked at him. Specifically, he said, about the fact that I signed it in 2005 and never read it carefully. I waited. "That was a significant oversight," he said. "Yes," I said. "I should have had my own attorney review it," he said. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. "I'm going to make sure," he said, "that I never sign a document without having someone I trust review it, regardless of who drafted it or who presents it to me." "That's good practice," I said. He looked at me. "Is that what you were teaching me?" he asked. "With the shareholder agreement. Was that—" He stopped. "Was that intentional?" I thought about Bernard drafting the agreement in 1985, about the specific language we had chosen, about the way that language had sat unchanged through 2 amendments over 35 years. "I drafted the agreement to protect the company," I said. "The way it protected the company on the night of the party was a consequence of that protection. Not the original intention." He nodded. "But you let it protect you," he said. "When it needed to," I said. "Yes." He looked at his plate. Then he looked up. "I want to learn that," he said. "The way you think about documents, about protection, about the long game." I looked at my son. "Sunday dinners," I said. "We can talk about it at Sunday dinners." He nodded. Then he picked up his fork. And we had dinner. 6 months after the closing, I went to Italy. I had been saying I would go to Italy for 20 years. Every year when the company's demands made the trip impossible, I had said, "Next year. Next year when things are more stable. Next year when I can afford the time." Things had been stable for 6 months. I could afford the time. I went for 3 weeks. I did not take my laptop. I called Marcus once, from a restaurant in Florence, to ask how things were going. "Fine," he said. "Everything is fine." "Good," I said. "I'll call next week." I hung up and ordered more wine, and looked out at the Arno River, and thought about 35 years, and a folding table in a living room, and a document placed on a table in the Biltmore, and the particular arithmetic of what a life adds up to when you build it with the materials available, and the patience required, and the absolute refusal to accept other people's assessment of when you are finished. I was not finished. I was, for the first time in 35 years, simply choosing what came next. And that, I thought, looking at the river in the October light, was the whole point. Not the acquisition, not the $340 million, not the expressions on Marcus and Craig's faces when I placed the document on the table. The choosing. The fact that at 67 years old I had built something from a folding table, and 35 years of showing up, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had decided that a thing was going to happen, and that the thing had happened, on my terms, at my timing, by my decision. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. There is something I want to tell you about building things. Not the strategy of it, though strategy matters. Not the financial architecture, though that matters too. But the fundamental thing, the thing that precedes all of it, and that makes all of it possible. Patience. Not passive patience. Not the patience of someone waiting for something to happen to them, but the active patience of someone who has decided that a thing is going to happen, and who has organized their time and attention and resources around making it happen on the timeline that the thing requires, rather than the timeline that other people have decided is appropriate. My children planned my retirement on a timeline that served them. I planned my sale on a timeline that served the company. Their timeline was 18 months. My timeline was 35 years. Both timelines were deliberate. Only one of them was long enough to produce what it was designed to produce. I want to tell you this because I think the pressure to move on someone else's timeline, to accept someone else's assessment of when you are finished, when you have built enough, when it is time to step back and let someone else take over, is one of the most significant pressures that people who build things experience. And it almost always comes from people who have not built the thing they are asking you to step back from. The people who have built things understand, in a way that the people who join things do not, that the builder determines when the building is complete. Not the children, not the board, not the well-organized retirement party with the white linens and the 47 guests and the transition documents and the pen placed beside the signature line. The builder. You. If you are building something, quietly, patiently, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that a thing is going to happen, I want you to know that the timeline is yours, not someone else's. Yours. And when the time comes, when you decide, on your own terms, that the thing is complete, the document you place on the table will say exactly what you want it to say, not what anyone else planned for you to sign. What you decided. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. I want to ask you one last thing before we finish. Is there something you are building? Something that other people have decided you should be finished with, should step back from, should hand over, that you are not finished with yet? And do you know, clearly and without doubt, that the timeline is yours? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story found something in you, if it reached the person who is still building, who is not finished, who has not yet placed the document on the table, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly. Stories about the people who build things on their own timelines and who determine, for themselves, when the building is complete. Those are the stories worth telling. And before you go, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? Still waters run deep. Thank you for sitting with me in them.